Hi, this is JB Helm. Thanks for tuning in. So, is it live or is it Memorax? I don't know how many of you remember Memorax. They sell like CDs now, but years ago they used to sell different blank media like cassettes and VHS tapes. And I still have a lot of Memorax tapes. Like we used to record music on them. We used to give it to friends. We'd have playlists. And we'd give it to friends as gifts. So I still have a lot of them, and I still have a cassette player, believe it or not. Um, so the Memorax had a commercial where Ella Fitzgerald would be singing, and there would be a glass, and she would break the glass, and then they would say, "Was it live or was it Memorax?" And of course, they were insinuating that Memorax tape quality is so good that you can't even tell the difference. You can listen to the tape, and it'll sound like you listen to a live recording. And with AI now, there's that whole thing about people saying, well, so many books are going to be written by AI. Personally, I don't think you're going to have if you just tell AI to write a book, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, it's not going to be that good because there's a human element in it. Now I'm writing these thrillers. I have a Frankie Valentine thriller. Book one is the Valentine Protocol. And I just came out with the second one, Signal to Kill. I wrote a book years ago, a fiction book, but which I didn't like, and I pulled it. I should never come out with it because I didn't have a good plot. This time I worked on the plot, for a long time, especially with this first book. Because I had to set up the character, and there's a lot of character development that went into the first book, so that people get an idea of what this person is Frankie Valentine, and one of the things that I think people have to understand too is that there's always been writers that didn't write their books. I did a quick AI search using Copilot. How many books I said are ghostwritten? So it says novels are ghostwritten more often than most people assume. One major industry survey estimates 40% of published novels include ghostwriters. Nonfiction dominates the ghostwriting market, accounting for 68% of ghostwriting clients. Now, I don't know if that's accurate. These are just, they had some surveys where they interviewed 2,000 authors. Nonfiction bestsellers, at least 60% of ghostwritten, according to industry estimates, cited in NPR-linked reporting. And here's one of the survey, a Reedsy-based industry found that almost 40% of all published novels are ghostwritten. And then they talk about certain genres have more ghostwriting than others, and of course celebrity ghostwriting, politicians, people that you see on TV, actors, whatever, they're claiming like 80% of those are. Here's major publishers, 60% according to the NPR, 40% according to the survey, ghostwritten. Self-published could be as high as 50 to 70% ghostwritten. Self-published novels, they estimate 30 to 60% are ghostwritten. Memoirs, that's funny. Now that's funny. 35% of ghostwriting projects are memoir. That's really funny. You're going to have a memoir and have somebody else write your memoir. Okay. The reason why I point that out is, look, there are writers that are very successful. They have like a franchise. You have people that have published like 150 books, right? It's kind of hard to believe that they wrote all those books, because what happens is that you have a very small percentage of writers that have such a huge following. I mean, they're so successful, and that's there aren't that many writers like that. Like the Stephen Kings and the John Grishams and Tom Clancy. These people have basically like I said, a franchise. Their name is so well branded that anybody could just write the book for them. I mean, they're going to make money. And I'm not saying that they don't write their books, but when somebody has like 150 novels out, like James Patterson has, I think, I don't know how many. He may even have 200. Does he write all those? I don't know. I mean, he's very talented. He definitely wrote a lot of them, and he established himself as a very successful, a very interesting writer in his field. But once you get that big, you just can hire someone, and they're all under non-disclosure contracts. I don't know if it says it here, but that's the way it works. Like if you're commissioned to write a book for someone, they pay you percentage of, they pay up front or they pay a percentage of the royalties, and you get a contract that you have to sign in non-disclosure. So in other words, no one's going to come out and say, I wrote that book. It's probably happened, but I mean, it's highly unlikely because you're going to get sued. But I mean, ghostwriters, that's a legitimate profession. And there are some very, very good ghostwriters. And some of them, just come right out of college and, they're brilliant writers, and right away they get scooped up. It's easier actually to just write for someone else because they can give you an idea. I have an idea for a story, and you can flesh it out with them. And meanwhile, you're doing most of the writing and you're getting paid a lot of money. You don't have to travel around the country promoting your book. So it's a good profession if you're a successful, ghostwriter. And there's always fakery in everything. When you have, look at singers. Most singers who record now, maybe I shouldn't say most, but a lot of singers who record, even very, very good singers, there are things built into the recording, the editing platform that they're using to edit the music, where it smooths out their voice. So in other words, if they crack or they go off key, they just press a button and that's eliminated. It just, smooths everything out. So they sound great on their recordings. And this way you don't have to keep doing it over and over again and try to get it right. And of course, you can also punch in, like say you make a mistake, you can cut out that section. It's just like editing a film. You can record like 2 lines, take that and put it in. That's the way they used to do it most of the time years ago. Now, like I said, they just have this, digital equipment that just smooths everything out. Look, it's money. When money's involved, people just want to, come out with a good product. They don't really, they know that the public doesn't really know what's going on in the background, and one of the things about writing fiction, the editing part of it is extremely important. My novels are 160 pages long. These are 30,000 word novels, so they're basically novellas. This is the way I wanted to write because I have a newspaper background. And if I hired an editor, and I've hired editors for nonfiction, I hired editors for my my first novel that came out years ago. None of them were that good. I was an editor. I worked as an editor for a newspaper for 5 years. I'm a better editor than the people I've hired. But the thing is you can't edit your own copy. You have to have, other people help, look at your copy. In my opinion, you can't just you have to edit yourself, but you also have to have someone read it. My second book here, in fact, that just came out with Signal to Kill, which is the second Frankie Valentine thriller. I hired a beta reader, and this was a woman who reads mysteries and thrillers, and she gave me her input on my first draft, and I made some changes based on her suggestions. So as far as like the final edit too, I mean, I edit at least every chapter. I edit at least 3 times. And my final edit is very, it takes me, quite a long time. I write about 6 pages a day. I try to use Stephen King's method. You write 6 pages a day. He says I can write a book in 3 months. His books are a lot longer than mine, so I can actually write a book in 2 months as long as I write every day. On this book, I wrote 7 days a week. I mean, I wrote about 30 hours a week on this book for 7 weeks. And that's including the editing. The editing took me like 10 straight days. The final editing. I mean, if I really include it, it's actually more than 10 days because I edit 3 times, at least 3 times. And of course, like I said, that's really important. Now, if I hired someone, you could pay them $200, $300, $400, $500. I haven't, I don't know any editors, and the ones I've hired weren't that good. If you're going to get an editor who's the kind of quality that they have at, say, Random House, you're going to have to pay a couple $1,000s to get. I mean, these people that work for major publishing houses, they're very good editors. So if you have someone who's writing bestsellers, like a James Patterson or John Grisham, you better believe they have a really top-notch editor. And that person is going to make sure that their book is ready, not only ready for market, but ready to be a bestseller, right? They're going to, and they're going to tell the writer if there's sections in there they don't think are any good, they're going to tell them, you got to change this. It's all about the final product. These people have, these big writers, they're worth millions of dollars to these publishing houses. So they have to make sure that the final product is exactly what they want it to be. If you get a couple of flops in a row, that franchise could be dead. Most of the time, though, because they have all these ghostwriters and these really talented editors, once they get it rolling, as long as their name's on the book, they're going to get sales. And all of these writers too, they have some books that aren't as good as the others. I mean, if you look at Amazon and look at the reviews of any of these famous writers, you'll see people that'll say, this is nowhere near as good as his best books, but they read it anyway. This is the thing; they have such a great fan base. And when you have a brand like that, like a James Patterson or any of these people, Stephen King, it's really amazing. Now, Stephen King is one thing we know about him. He's a real writer. I mean, he started writing at a very young age. He got turned down a lot. He's not someone who came from a different profession. It's tough if you don't have, like, I've been writing and being published for going all the way back to when I was 20 years old, but it was nonfiction. But I used that type of style, like writing for newspapers. I kind of use that style as part of my fiction writing. So it's very concise. It moves along, just like you have to write for a newspaper. That's the one thing great about working for a newspaper. Is like when I worked for that newspaper years ago for 5 years. Sometimes your editor just gives you a story that comes off the wire and says, "I need this for the front page in an hour," and you have to make fun. Back then, we didn't, you couldn't use the internet. You used to have to call people up, get quotes, and blah, blah, blah. And it was great. That's a great experience because you have to learn how to write concisely, and you have to, you can't just sit there and stare at the screen. You have to sit down and start writing right away. So it teaches you to, come up with ideas. And it's funny too, you talk about AI. It is unfortunate that, there are people like writing nonfiction books where they're just going to say, write me a book about, the keto diet or something, and they're going to come out with some garbage and just put their name on it, But it's easy to spot those books because, like, if I'm going to buy a book, say on, like, I like to work out. I work out with weights almost every day, right? If I want to read a bodybuilding book, I'm going to make sure that the person exists. I'm going to look them up. If it's a natural bodybuilder who's been, training with weights for the last 25 years, and he's been in contests and everything, and he comes out with a book, and I look at him and I say, well, he doesn't use steroids. I can see, you can tell people that use steroids. I'm not going to read a book by anybody, who uses steroids because that's not going to help me. So, but if it's a natural bodybuilder that says, hey, I've been doing this 25 years and look at the results I got, I might just buy the book. But if I see a book on Amazon and I look up the author's name and he doesn't exist, you can tell it's AI, right? And you don't want that because this is going to be pulling some stuff. There's no personal references in there. There's no anecdotes. There's no humor. You want to. Same thing with YouTube. Right? I'm not going to watch AI generated YouTube videos. They have these doctors now. It's so funny. They'll be like, I'm a doctor, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm going to tell you about, these 3 things that you could take, these 3 supplements that are going to make you healthy or something. And they're not doctors. It's just that they made it all up. It's a AI generated. You look up the doctor's name, it doesn't exist. Any doctor, even my doctor who isn't even that old, if I put her name, in a Google search, her biography comes up, right? If your doctor doesn't have any sort of biography or anything, I don't know, you better make sure that they're actually a doctor. But that's the problem with these things. And like I've seen somebody say something like, with supplements, they'll have a YouTube video that's AI generated, and they'll say, if you take fish oil supplements, look at this report that said that fish oil supplements are good for you, right? Well, they don't tell you about this other scientific studies that show that they don't do anything for you. Right? So Now, if you had someone who's a nutritionalist who has a YouTube channel and they study this and they, you know, they're going to give you their honest opinion, they'll show you both sides. They'll say, well, here's some, reports that say that fish oil is good for you, and here's others that say it's not. And then they'll evaluate and give you their personal opinion about maybe what, a good way to approach that. But AI isn't going to do that because they're just putting these YouTube videos out, hoping that you click on them. They don't really care about you. They don't care about your health. They just want you to click on the video, right? And I love watching people on YouTube, but I want personal. I want to make sure that that's a real person. I want their opinion based on their life experiences, right? And their expertise in a lot of cases. So I just find it interesting though. But there's always been fakery, just like it's sales. Hey, look, people trying to sell you something, they're going to tell you whatever it is, whatever they need to tell you to get the sale a lot of times. So you always have to be careful. And look, that's the way life is. Business, publishing is, these big publishing houses, there's a lot of money involved. So sure, if they can use ghostwriters, they will. It's it's been going on for decades. It's the same thing as AI, basically. So instead of a computer generating it, it's another person. The thing is that, yes, the ghostwriter is going to be a better writer than AI. I'm not saying, that the ghostwriters aren't good. They're good. But what I am saying is the name of the person that's on that book did not write the book. Or they maybe wrote some of the book, right? So it's this kind of thing has always been going on. Same thing with recordings, like I said before, about how they smooth out your voice. Well, sometimes they don't even play the instruments. Remember the group, the Monkees? Now, I liked the Monkees. I thought that their records were good. But a lot of the songs, they sang, but they didn't play the instruments. And there were groups. There are groups actually that have records out that there isn't any record of any public record of them ever performing live. In other words, they appeared on TV on shows like American Bandstand or something, and they lip synced the songs. So they had an album out, and there are a lot of groups like this. They had albums out, and they never performed. So no one knows if they could even sing those songs live. And whenever they were on a television show, they lip synced. So there's always been a certain amount of fakery. As long as people can make money on it, they'll do it. So that's the thing. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know how many professional ghostwriters there are. There really are a lot. As far as using AI to write, again, you have to have that soul. Like in this book that I wrote. Well, actually, the new book. I'm writing a book now. I'm going to have I always wanted to have two series, because this one takes place like in the 1970s, at least right now in the beginning stages of Frankie Valentine's career. But my other book that I'm working on now, a new series, his name is Dominic Kane, and he comes back from World War II and he wants to be a policeman, but he has an injury. So he ends up with the Pinkerton agencies. Now, my father worked in a bar in New York City called Muller's, which was near the old Madison Square Garden on West 50th Street. I was there when I was a little boy, and but I was so small that I only remember walking in, and I remember how it looks. And there are pictures of it. I even have some postcards that they used to sell there, or give out. Now, my dad told me stories like about the mafia, things like that, from his background. So in my book, I have Dominic Kane's parents own that bar, but instead of calling it Muller's, I have it called Kane's. And his father's Al, so it's Al Kane's bar. So he's my character in this new series I'm working. He works in the bar where my father worked, right? And in the same location in Manhattan, right near the old Madison Square Garden. And some of the things that are in that book, I used from my own personal experiences, plus my father's personal experiences, and my mother's to a certain extent. And the same thing in these Frankie Valentine's books, and that's the thing. That's why, somebody, if they're going to try to use AI to generate a novel, and just say, give us some prompts, you're not going to have good dialogue. You're not going to have good relationships. You're not going to have good character development. You're not going to have any sense of humor. Like this guy, Frankie Valentine, has kind of a wry sense of humor. You're not going to have that. AI doesn't do any of that stuff good. What it's good for, like I give this to, after I do my first edit, I give it to Claude, the chapter. And then Claude comes back and says, well, this section right here, your prose is a little slow compared to this is not your usual prose. Tighten it up a little bit. You made a mistake here, blah, blah, blah. So I get that feedback, and that's fine. But I mean, if you just tell it, to write me a book, you're going to have a book that is just so dull. You have to have that, and even in this book too, I have romance, and the conversations between like the Frankie Valentine and like the woman in this book, for instance, are cute, and they're kind of romantic. And in fact, in this book, he meets someone else that is going to be part of his regular team, Hemingway, and her name is, and it's they have the interaction between the two of them is very good. She becomes part of the team with him and his friend Stu. So these personal interactions is what people hold, can sense that when they read your novel. I mean, it's just so important, and you're putting that in from your life experiences, right? So anyway, thanks for tuning in. I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my channel. By the way, if you listen to any of my songs, I wrote these songs that are on here. I have like songs on my JB Helm YouTube page that I wrote even for these books. Like I have a Signal song, and I recorded them with a Suno, but I wrote the words, and I don't play an instrument, so I sang the song into Suno. I actually sang it. I recorded it on Audacity and put it in. So this way they follow my melody. But I have other songs that I wrote with a songwriter who a friend of mine named Rose, and we have a few songs on my YouTube page too. In fact, here, I'll just show you. Yeah, now here's Crazy Days. I wrote this one.
Pests are terrible guests.
I wrote this one with Rose, and
so before
I wrote the words, she wrote the music. So she recorded the music with a guitar. So it was a demo. I took her demo, put it into Suno, put my words in there, and we came up with the song "Crazy Days," which is one of my favorite songs that I've written.
All the time.
Actually, I'm going to do some videos to go along with these, but I just have a photo here now. But I have a few songs.
Line for you.
But anyway, thanks for tuning in, and this is JB Helm.